Good afternoon and welcome to the Board of Education for the San Ramon Valley Unified School District's January workshop on trends. Let's start. Well, we'll call to order and then let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone would please rise. So I'd just like to make a quick comment about the agenda before we take a motion to approve it. Because this was brought to my attention. Public comment is at the end of the agenda and it is for items related to the workshop items. And the reason it's at the end is so that anyone in the public can comment on what we have talked about. We don't want it to be interrupting, but we don't want it to be first because they don't know what we're talking about yet. So that's why it's at the end there. I just wanted to make that clarification. Can I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Oh, wait, I guess we got to do roll call. It's all new to me still.
The motion was made by Board Member Bratt and seconded by Board Member Clark. Roll call vote. Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Okay, now we can begin the board workshop and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Malloy to introduce the items.
Thank you, President Hurd, and it's good to be here with everyone. I would like to just briefly introduce Agenda 4.1. In the board meeting agenda next week, you will be taking action on this particular item. I want to confirm and clarify that we aren't taking any action, obviously, in a workshop setting. But in light of some of the comments that have been shared with me individually, it was really clear that having an opportunity for you to have a public discussion before any action about this particular matter is important. And though the agenda item is a mouthful with lots of words, as you can see there, that's the official title that you'll see on the board agenda next week. It basically deals with all of the salaries that are connected to anyone not represented by a union. That would be the best way of describing it. As has been the past practice of our district and most other districts, which you'll hear about tonight, the whole concept, and I'll use the easy to understand term, the Me Too clause has been used, which basically means that whatever has been negotiated with unions has also been part of the decision related to those not represented by unions. There's lots of reasons for that, which go way beyond our district. And I'll introduce John in a minute, who can help you understand that. So again, we wanted you to have an opportunity for that discussion. We have made available to our board members, or do you have it, the paper copies of our salary schedules? You will have this information for this discussion, which is our own salary schedules, which are already public. They're already on our website. Our community can always look at this, but we wanted you to have a paper copy in case you didn't want to go back and forth between your computer, so that you can see exactly where we stand. I want to be clear also that if you wish to discuss in a board setting, a board meeting setting, any of the specific items related to some of the comparators with other districts and such, that would be something that you would discuss in closed session before a board meeting, before an open session discussion. So we haven't brought to you for this workshop discussion anything related to specific salaries in other places and all the rest. But again, John may be able to fill in some of those pieces of information as well. So in summary, we're talking about all of the persons not represented by unions. You'll be taking action on this item next week. We wanted to give you an opportunity for this public discussion, and now I will introduce John Gray. Obviously, because I and the members of the cabinet team are a part of this group, when it was brought to my attention that you wish to have some public discussion, I did not feel, and you I'm sure will agree, that I should be facilitating that discussion since I am actually a part of this group. That being said, we have been offered on a number of opportunities since I've arrived, and I know way before I arrived, John Gray, who is the leader of school services, who we rely on regularly, who represents, supports, learns, leads, and assists districts all up and down the state related to matters such as human resources, finance, you name it. I'm going to let John explain a little bit more about who he is and what he brings, since some of you may not know him as well. We're just grateful, and I wanted to say this publicly, John, because whenever we reach out to John or John's team, it's an immediate response in terms of whatever questions or concerns or issues we're trying to wrestle with. So I am going to now, President Hurd, turn this over to John to take it from here.
Thank you.
Okay.
I turn that on. Thank you. For those who I haven't met yet, I'm John Gray. I'm with a company called School Services of California. We've been around since 1975. We exist to support public school districts, primarily in the budget areas. We do statewide workshops on the budget drop today, by the way. The governor released the budget, and so we'll have a conference with about 3,000 school district employees to share the details of the budget and operationalize it for them so they understand mechanically what it actually means to those districts. A lot of what I do and what I've worked with this district in the past is sometimes in the area of collective bargaining. Usually, if things don't go well, you find yourself at the impasse stage, things like that. And I typically assist districts trying to find common ground so the parties can agree. So prior to school services, I was 10 years, I was your Stella Kemp for Fresno Unified in Central Valley for many years. I've been at school services for 22 years. And I believe the reason your superintendent asked me to talk to you is we have a lot of experience in the areas that I think you're going to talk about. I haven't analyzed any of your data or anything specific to San Ramon. I'm talking to you about what we see as the general practices, why districts do what they do related to this issue. So that's where I'm coming from. And so I've probably done close to 300 fact findings. So my experience is based on my personal experience dealing with districts in collective bargaining, maybe 300 of them over my career. We also have human resources professionals, people like Keith, that come in and look at HR operations, look at classification, comp studies, that sort of thing. And so, based on my experience, compensation for those non-represented people, typically that's administrators, maybe central office administrators. A lot of times it's confidential employees. It varies in each district. Based on my experience, Me Too's are very common. It's very uncommon when we don't see what is negotiated with the bargaining units passed along to those other employees. And there's various reasons why. I will say there was sort of a deviation from that during the last recession. If you were any of you were on the board in 2008, we had a deep, dark recession. And that was when some school districts veered from that policy. And the reason it happened is we had a gigantic cut. And a lot of times administrators would take the lead and say, you know, we need to set an example. We're in a budget crisis. We're going to voluntarily reduce our compensation, and then we'll negotiate it with bargaining units. But sometimes that wasn't successful. The other things we would see is it was a deep cut, but it was a very long recovery, slow recovery, if you remember that. Very small cost of living adjustments of 1%, things like that. And some districts veered from that policy and put more money to just the bargaining units. That has resulted in a lot of business for us because the boards sitting there now are realizing they no longer have alignment between all their salaries. So as an example, it doesn't make sense for a highly compensated teacher to become a vice principal because of that compaction right there. There were some districts where Maybe it was just the central office and it didn't make monetary sense for a high school principal to come into the central office because they got out of alignment. And so some of the reviews we're doing right now are trying to fix some of those alignment issues. So, when you look at the various positions, the alignment's very important. Obviously, there's two kinds of people in the school district. There's teachers and people who support teachers, and you need them both. And if your alignment is right, meaning the differentiation between the various bargaining units, what it takes to move from a teacher to administrator, if those are right, to maintain that alignment, it's very common to whatever the increase is for the bargaining units to pass that along. Otherwise, you don't lose that alignment. What happens if you start freezing one group, the other groups start compressing, and maybe 5-10 years from now, you're going to have an issue if you can't attract principals, central office people, and then you'll call someone like us and we'll come in and do a study and say, now it's time to give one group a lot more than others. So we're working with districts right now where in order to get back into alignment, they're going to have to give administration the equivalent of about 20%, when everybody else is just negotiating based on the cost of living adjustment. So alignment's very important. You got to attract and retain high quality employees, teachers, classified, but also administrators, other non-represented, and obviously your cabinet. So when I do see districts that don't do Me Too, it's usually the response to something very specific. But in general, the practice is to do Me Too. That way you stay competitive. If you stop doing Me Too's, chances are you're going to lose your alignment and you're going to have to react sometime later when you find, if let's say you can't find high school principals or elementary school principals because you're no longer competitive. So I'd say the lion's share of district, no more than a lion's share. I've done 300 fact findings. I haven't done one yet where everybody did not get the same raise. But there were deviations during the last recession, and the districts that did that are tending to fix that now. So that's a broad overview of what I see, and it sends a signal. One of the things we also help districts with is trying to find them good chief business officials. And so we talk to a lot of administrators that are looking for, advancement in their career. And they'll ask the question, how is management treated compared to everybody else? And if there is a differentiation, it can send a signal to those prospective candidates that, it's the whole issue about it. So that's the broad strokes. And I'm happy to take any questions. And I'm just answering based on my experience, my observations. I have not done an analysis of San Ramon.
And if I can just add, when I spoke to John about coming, because I don't know all the questions that you might have, I just asked John to provide a general introduction and allow you to drive the conversation to John with whatever questions or comments that you want to make. So that's why there's not a long presentation, because frankly, this is your decision and then you need to drive that decision, and whatever information you need to inform that decision, John is the best reference or the best support for that. So I'll turn it back to you.
Can I just for clarity, and it may be an answer that Keith or John will provide, but just for our community, can you describe what these employees are? So does it start at the assistant principal and then it goes on up to superintendent, and that includes all, just the group that we're talking about?
Thanks. Keith, why don't you come to a mic and do that? I can do it, but I think you would be more accurate.
Sure. So again, we're talking about classified confidential employees, of which there are 3. Those are basically high-level administrative assistants in the business office, what used to be the superintendent's office, and the human resources office. About 130 or so administrators, assistant principals, directors, assistant directors, coordinators, executive directors, both certificated and classified, and then 4 contracted management employees. And those are the 3 assistant superintendents and the superintendent. So we're talking about roughly 140 district employees.
And all of those employees are afforded all the same benefits in terms of health and pension and all of that.
They are.
Okay, does anybody?
I do have a couple of questions. So like you said, occasionally recessions will lead to deviations from the Me Too policy, and you brought up 2008.
Right.
Are there any other times in the past, like in the early 2000s or in the 80s, where we have similar?
How old do you think I am? That's a joke. No,
Yeah.
that's a fair question. I started in 91. So
there you go.
I could, I don't know if I can talk about the 80s, but the 90s was just a very, the whole decade on school funding was pretty much a malaise. Not a lot of big dollars were coming in. At the time, I was an administrator in the school district, and our practice was to do Me Too's for everybody, but to be candid, the raises were very tiny. They were like 0.5%, 1%, and that sort of thing. I think the big deviation was in 2008, because you're right, we had the dot-com recession before that, but the depths of the cuts and the length of the cuts weren't as severe in 2008. So in 2008, we went down 22%. And it took forever because we just crawled out of that recession, right? We didn't bounce back. We just kind of, technically we weren't in a recession, but we crawled out over until like 2015. And so my recollections, that's when it really happened. And I don't recall it necessarily happening in these other times. It could have though.
And it got really muddy as we came out of it, because that's when LCFF was in there.
Yes.
And so the new money, the fix, the better years, was really
Yes.
convoluted, great word, because of the difference in what different districts got because of LCFF.
Right. All districts in the state. So as you remember, we used to be on a revenue limit funding, and all districts in the state got the same cut. But when recovery happened, districts didn't recover at the same rate. And based on your demographics, I think you're still one of the lowest funded state districts in the state of California. So yeah, so you crawled out even slower.
President Hurd, how did that affect the school district during that time when we were trying to call, as far as like, hiring talent to these positions? That might have been some deviation.
Because we always honored the
Me
Me
Too.
Too.
Okay, so we never did.
didn't have that dynamic
Got it.
that John was referring to. The new money came and it was distributed equitably among employees. I mean, equitably by percentage.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and if I remember, San Ramon Valley was very good in terms of having enough savings so that you ride out that recession in a different way than other school districts, like school districts in the state.
Correct. We did not have to make cuts, but we did, essentially free salaries. All employees went without raises for a number of years. And it's a really important point that everyone went without raises except for the step and column part that
Right.
happens in all the salary schedules.
Right. And I've observed this district for many years. Even when I was in Fresno, we'd look at this district, and this district has a long history of being very well managed and well governed and doing it right. A lot of districts during that same period of time weren't able to weather it in a similar fashion that you did. So maintaining reserves, all those things to protect employees. San Ramon did the right thing.
Sorry, to elaborate a little more on your question though, there was a time when we were really having trouble hiring high school principals, and they're hard to hire anyway, but and we did a comparative look at the salaries on those, and that was one particular job description that we actually did what John was saying of adjusted this schedule. It didn't happen through negotiations because they were unrepresented, but it was like, if we're going to recruit, we got to change this. And so those employees in that position got a boost.
Yeah. And that actually is a perfect segue into the other question that I wrote down is, I'm sure that we've done comparative analysis from similar job type to similar district and just for cost of living variances throughout the state to make sure that we're being competitive as well at the same time. Are there studies that we've done on that?
Well, So I can't comment specifically on San Ramon, but anytime a district goes through tough collective bargaining with teachers, you will do that for teachers. And in this district, typically what you see for teachers is who do you compete with, right? And so the Bay Area, East Bay, right, Fremont, you know, all the districts kind of around here. But it's interesting, you know, when you get to classified positions, sometimes you compete locally, but you also might compete with the county or you know, a city for custodians, things like that. Once you get up to administration, my experience is most administrators, it's more of a statewide look. And then when you hit superintendent, it's usually national. Yeah. Or
Yeah,
international,
international.
yes.
You can imagine when you're looking at national and you're having.
That's right,
compare
international.
California
Oh,
versus
yeah.
elsewhere.
Cost of living is different.
You know, there's one candidate who came in from another state who was actually from a low-funded school district in that state, and I think his jaw dropped when he realized really what we meant by saying California.
Yeah.
It's good to know.
Oh, actually, one further question.
Sure.
Does the Me Too policy work in reverse as well? If we right size, like let's say a recession comes and we have to take drastic measures, and then we have to right size those down the road, does that work in the other way too, towards the represented group, the unionized groups?
So the union you have to negotiate with. And so my observation during, because that happened, everybody was doing that during the last recession. And so districts took different approaches. Sometimes administrators just let, you know, saying, hey, we need to tighten our belts. And they just agreed to do that. And then later negotiated with the union. Sometimes they'd wait until they negotiated with the union, then everybody would follow. So the answer is I don't believe there were, I'd be shocked if there were any districts that cut or had furlough days for teachers that did not also have that for administration and the other groups.
Makes sense.
Does a unrepresented employee have an opportunity to negotiate for a raise at any other point?
I'm going to say no, but Keith is more of an expert on that than I am.
So in my experience, the only employees that typically have the ability to negotiate salaries are those who are on independent employment contracts with the district. Okay, those who are paid on a salary schedule, which is the overwhelming number of managers and supervisors in the district. In all of the years that I've done this work and have been in education, have never seen an individual employee necessarily negotiate his or her own individual salary.
So when they're hired, they're put in a classification, a category, and then there may be some wiggle room within that in terms of what they've been paid at a previous job, but it's definitely within that.
Correct. It is based upon the salary schedule that you have there at the table before you. Okay.
And then is there a reason to bucket all unrepresented employees, so the contract and the rest, I guess? Did that make sense?
I think I know what you mean, and I think it relates to what John was talking about with the things being in alignment. I'm wondering, Keith, if you're the best person to explain how we're kind of not unique, but unusual in that we do have a schedule even for contract employees. Do you want to explain the motivation on that and why that? Yeah.
Yeah, so basically this is something that preceded my arrival in the school district. But a number of years ago, the Board of Education determined with the superintendent in place at the time that there was a need to actually develop a salary schedule for all of the employees who were on individual employment contracts. And I believe there were either 4 or 5 at that time as well. And what was basically set up was a step structure. You have a copy of the assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent, and superintendent salary schedule in front of you. It's a 5-step schedule, but each employee in those classifications remains on the same step for a period of 3 years. At the end of 3 years, based upon those employee performance evaluations, if they are rated above satisfactory in at least 2 of those 3 years, including the last of those 3 years, year 3, year 6, et cetera, then you're given the opportunity to move to the next step. And that's essentially a 5% bump for longevity in the position. So there's 5% between each of the 5 steps on that executive administrator salary schedule.
In the same way step and column is treated automatically in the other units. This is also, it's just 3-year steps instead of 1-year steps. And this frequently comes up when it's time for those 3-year bumps. Why are you doing this? And it's because we're treating all of the employees, they're, the same. And I think maybe to reiterate all of this, it goes back to valuing people and giving them reason to stay rather than to hop, so that we're dealing with leadership changes constantly. Because what motivated this salary schedule to go into effect when it did, and I believe it was before my time was, yeah, I know it was, is that we were bringing in an assistant superintendent for facilities, and the market out there to get one with any experience was going to be making almost as much as the superintendent and significantly more than the assistant supervisor services who had been here a long time. And so it really brought to bear that dynamic of, you don't want to encourage people to hop in order to have a competitive salary.
And these numbers are base salary numbers, not fully loaded comp. Sorry to make you keep saying enough, Keith.
Yeah, so they are all inclusive in terms of that is the salary figure. The only thing in it to that salary figure is health and welfare benefits and statutory retirement program contributions.
And I think I will add that one of the things that is different between districts is that some districts like ours, straightforward, salary, benefits, pension, done. Other districts, especially with their contracted employees, build in other pieces like pension and such, retirement benefits and such, where our district does not do that. So it's also important when people are comparing data that it's an apples and apples comparison, because, correct me, Keith or John, what gets recorded and what gets reported is the salary piece. Right. There are other benefits, go ahead, John, that may not be in what is seen publicly.
In many of the management studies we do, you really have to dig in order to find out, but you'll find in other places, you'll have the salary, but they'll have an allowance, an expense allowance for this, a car allowance for that, various other deferred type comp things that are all added up. When you add them up, they can be pretty significant, but the reported salary is much lower, but you have to add them all up together. Very, very common.
And then last question that I can think of for now is, what's that? Yeah, exactly. Second to last question. When we did the salary renegotiation a few months ago, I believe we had to send a certification letter to the county, and they had to do a review of our finances and say, yes, this looks appropriate considering what your reserves are, your budget, et cetera, et cetera. Are these going to be big enough do we have to do that again? Does this impact that in any way? How does that work?
So we actually do take to the county, just as we do for the bargaining units, what we are contemplating with respect to management salaries. The county reviews that and sends certification in the same manner that it does for the 3 collective bargaining units.
Okay. And if I remember on that letter, the only caution was this looks good unless we go into some sort of recession. Correct? Is okay. Sorry, Stella.
Happy New Year. It's nice to see you guys. Yeah, this actually, the language that the county sent to us in the letter is pretty boilerplate cautionary language for all school districts. It's like, yes, you can, unless the sky falls.
Got it. All right.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think it's important to note, and John referred to this, Rachel, I think you did as well, that if conditions change, you as a board, supported by us, have to bring forward resolute suggestions for your approval negotiating those which must be negotiated with our unions and dealing with our fiscal reality, however it's dealt to us. So again, that I think goes without saying, that it will be your job, should financial circumstances change, supported by us. And I said, it's very important, negotiated where unions are involved to deal with that reality.
So I want to first say that I really am glad that we're having this conversation. I think that it's important and it's crunchy, it's hard, and and I apologize if I'm making anyone flinch, but I think that it's really valuable for our community to kind of see us having these conversations, so it doesn't seem like just a blank check and we're just signing on the dotted line, and so be it. When I think about where my mind goes in this conversation, I worry about our staff, teachers, certificated, classified, assistant principals, the lower sections of each of our three groups, classified, certificated, and unrepresented, and how we want to be able to lift up those salaries as best we can, so that they are living wages, right? So that they are wages that those folks can live in our community and teach our children. So at the same time, I completely understand the value of ensuring that we are aligned, that we are competitive, and all of those things. So it's it's kind of one of those puzzles, right? One of those kind of complex things. And so my question to the board would be: is there a way for us to look at this in other ways, or kind of come at it in a different direction? So for example, one of the thoughts that, and this is just a, ideation type of thing, this isn't anything, but one thought that I have is this idea of, and you can tell me if this is even something that other people have done, but this idea of having, okay, let's say that it was negotiated a 5% raise. Let's just make it easy. And so, and then we're doing the Me Too, and everyone, has negotiated that 5%, and then the unrepresented also have that. And then instead of assuming, well, they're unrepresented, we're not going to do a Me Too, none of them are going to get this 5%. Let's put a cap on the salary level. So for example, 5% raise for everybody up to $250,000. Once, which I mean, I don't, these are just kind of numbers meant for now. This is just basic ideation, right? But so then if you make $200,000 a year, you're going to get a 5% bump. You make $250,000 a year, you're going to get a 5% bump. You make $300,000 a year, you're going to get a 5% bump on $250,000, and then that's your bump. So that it's kind of stopping an explosion, but still allow, and it's not, those are big words, but anyway, it's just an idea of how do we kind of, put a stopper, a cap on it without reducing that, keeping that momentum of, I don't know if I'm making sense.
Sure. No, I understand
Yeah,
completely what you said. So, so in my experience, I have not seen that specifically. Let's be candid. I haven't seen that, but I have seen when boards have interests in targeting money to, the most common, I'll just say it, is beginning teacher, right? That's what Keith goes out to the job fairs. We want to raise that and and the issue is that's a negotiable item. And a lot of times management and the board would like to do that. But you have to negotiate that. And when you target dollars to a specific small group within a bigger group, that's really hard to negotiate, meaning it can be done. But the cap thing, I have not seen that, but I understand completely what you said. But I've seen others try to target money to the schedule, but what complicates that is the fact you have to negotiate that. And to be candid, the team you're negotiating with may or may not be in those positions, and it's just very difficult to do. But I've seen districts have an interest in that, and some have actually executed on that one. I haven't dealt with the cap one though.
And I appreciate that you're throwing out ideas. I do wonder if the end result of that would end up being that lack of alignment, compression of hard to recruit leadership positions, because it really would be targeting the contracted employees and maybe a few long-term other study the schedules to know the numbers, but we've all been through well, actually, only Susanna and I now have been through a superintendent search, and I've been through several. It's not the kind of thing you want to do frequently. Not that it's, it's, I mean, sure, it's hard, but the end result to the district that I don't think everyone can always appreciate is that when you have frequent leadership changes, it just causes a lot of stress in an organization. I mean, all the great work we're doing on strategic directions is great. These superintendents have had other, equivalents of strategic directions. And I think just over time, it kind of wears people out about all that change.
That's a good point, because continuity of leadership is one of those big FICMAT indicators that they look at. And, being in a district for 10 years, I think I had 8 superintendents and one of them stayed for 7 years. So I had in the long run, and it really makes a difference when you know who the governance team, the board and the superintendent. Continuity of leadership it makes it a much better place to work. You can actually execute and follow through with strategic plans because the people who put it together are there to implement it. So, but FICMAT recommends that as a big indicator of district health.
Because I think it's a commonly held misunderstanding that all school districts have inflated management. And there may be some that do, but this one certainly doesn't. We compare that ratio to other districts. And just in terms of valuing all employees and valuing the amount of stress at different levels of jobs and everyone working hard and pulling their share, I think we have to be really careful that we don't give the impression that anybody's overpaid or undervalued or overvalued.
Yeah, and just being my own devil's advocate, I mean, I think about like how much is that really saving the district and how much of a burden is it creating? So I'm just, but again, it's just, throwing out having the conversation. which I
That's the
think we
point
need
of
to
a
have.
workshop. I think
Yeah.
it's really important that we're having this conversation in public and it not just being sidebar conversations just with 2 people.
The only thing I'd like to add regarding your first idea, again, this isn't negotiations. We wouldn't be having this discussion in public if it were, but as you know, but I'm sharing this with any of our community members who are here or are listening, you give us direction before we negotiate. So if there are any of those particular pieces when we are at negotiation time that you want us to at least consider with our union partners, that would be the time that we would have that discussion and you would ask us to present some of those ideas and bring back to you what responses we receive from it. So I just wanted to confirm that that's how that part of the process works for anyone who might be watching that isn't familiar.
Because we have talked about that over the years, about when you actually look at the cells, especially on the certificated salaries. Yeah. But when you actually look at the cells on the certificated schedule, you're like, how did this happen? I mean, it's not like someone took an Excel sheet and dragged and, added a certain amount for each cell. It's kind of random. And, we've wondered, what about fixing that sometime? That could be something that the board says, we want to elevate the lowest experienced, cells, and we want it to be more rational, right? Or, that would be our prerogative, like John was suggesting.
Now I would ask, and when we look at like our assistant principal, look at the unrepresented and we look at our assistant principals, and I could look at it, I guess, instead of ask the question, but is it in their best interest to actually become assistant principals if they have 20 years under their belt, or is it not?
So we have to look, what we typically do Trustee Bratt, is when we hire somebody or move somebody from a classroom position to an assistant principal, we look at their per diem rate of pay. Okay, it's always driven by the per diem rate of pay because the length of work year for teachers is different, right, than it is for assistant principals. So we look at the per diem rate and we place that individual at a point where they are receiving a greater per diem rate of pay. In other words, kind of like a promotional bump, you know, if you will. So if you are, for instance, a 5th or 7th year teacher who is moving into an administrative position, assistant principalship, that most of that salary schedule, it will be to your benefit to move into a management position. Whereas if you have 20 years of experience out of the 15 steps or so on that tier 4 schedule, we may need to place you on step 5 or 6 in order to make it, you know, to your benefit. So it depends upon the individual circumstances of the individual and where they are in their career, or in some cases, what district they are coming from in order to come and work and serve as an administrator in this one.
So Keith, that would then, as you're looking for how you still make it kind of worth their while to take the step to be an assistant principal, you move them along in the step, but then if they stay there for a while, they'll top out and get to the end of that row.
They will do that earlier, yes.
I have a couple comments I'd like to make. First of all, I'm really glad that we're doing this today because I've talked to Dr. Malloy about this whole system, and it's been something for me to wrap my head around because I come from the private sector and I work in a company where I handle all of the salaries and HR and all of that. And the private sector does not do anything like this generally. I don't personally deal with unions, so that's another reason. So it was difficult for me to understand why things were done the way they were with the Me Too, because I'm used to giving salary increases for merit and, you know, of course, whatever the market will bear, whatever you have to pay for a position. That being said, I kind of feel the way some of the things that Laura was expressing, I kind of feel the same way because while I really, really value, and I know that we have to stay competitive as far as our administrators and our superintendent and how important those positions are, but when they get a 5% raise, that raise is a lot more dollars than a teacher who is making $60,000 a year who gets a 5% raise. So I know obviously a lot of that is connected to their position and the responsibility and the qualifications, but that's the part that is just hard for me to justify, only because I, like what Laura was expressing, want to see those lower salaried employees be able to come up, especially our teachers. So that's kind of the quandary. And I understand the importance of the compaction and that we don't want to have that happen because then, you know, we lose people and things like that. But this whole idea of having everything be like dominoes where it's all connected up like that, I don't know. I don't know if there's a better way. Obviously, there hasn't been one that's been found, or somebody would have been doing it. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when I think just philosophically, I think that the idea of raising those that are at the lowest end of all the ladders up without taking away from those that are at the highest end of the ladder. And that's kind of where and that just comes down to money, I guess. It's funding, right? But that's, to me, that's the end goal. Is it possible? I don't know.
And I think that's where the way you would make that happen is through the negotiating process about saying our priority is adding to these cells before we even start talking about the percentage increase. Because like what you were saying, the percentage is the thing that math of a percentage, the multiplicative factor of it is what enhances that other part.
So have we ever done where, you know, I know when we hire like a superintendent, assistant superintendent, some of the, you know, management, we do competitive, right? Market competitive numbers and stuff. Have we ever done something like that for the teachers, like the lower levels, where we want to make sure that they are at their starting salary that is, more competitive or at least market.
Well, yeah, so that's a great question. And what's happens in the state of California with collective bargaining, all that sort of thing. You recently went through a process called fact finding. You probably recall that. A lot of fun fact finding, isn't it? And specifically, there is a criteria on comparability, and it looks at the beginning salary, the middle salary, and the maximum salary, and they're required to take that into consideration. So I think, as your superintendent just said a little bit earlier, technically you can negotiate different things. I've seen districts give the raise $1,000 a cell instead of a percentage. There's things, but you have to have a willing partner to do that. And so that's through collective bargaining. And that's about as deep as I want to go, because it's a collective bargaining issue. But if the two parties agree, you have an agreement.
I guess it would be a closed session discussion to discuss if, we wanted to look at that, but I'm wondering if we feel like we have a good sense of, I think of how Mark Jewett used to always refer to levers, right? Percentages kind of enhance that multiplicative factor, and dealing with the cells gets a little more to what both Laura and Shelley were expressing a desire to address. And so maybe that's food for thought right there as we go into, the next budgeting cycle and when the next bargaining cycle starts. Because I think it's important to kind of separate the two in our minds. And then maybe the cross purposes don't impede each other, if that makes sense. Because I think we're in agreement that we want to treat everybody fairly, and we don't want to end up with compaction, but there is a desire to lift the lower paid employees up so that they have a cost of, have a living wage, kind of can live here, or can at least be a little more comfortable living here. Any further thoughts on this topic or additional questions? It's not very often we get John right with us.
He's very persuasive. Yeah, you will be here. No.
Since we do have two topics in this workshop, I'm wondering if the board would entertain us doing public comment like 5.1 and then do 4.2 and come back and do a 5.2. Because, there are a few cards. That way, if John would like to stay for the questions. Okay, so our first public speaker will be, don't see a name on this. It just says Taiwanese American. So I'll go ahead and call up that person.
Hi, everyone. I want to make sure that, I'm not Helen Chern. I want to make sure everyone is safe. Nobody gets a steak knife, because I'm a public speaker and I'm speaking for everyone who don't dare to come up here to speak to you because people get steak knives outside of their garage like I recently did. Okay, so I'm for taking care of people. But then who are these people? On your agenda, it is listed very strangely. You want us to pay for confidential employees? Who are confidential employees? Why are they confidential? And is it because they're not American citizens? What is Tier 4 management? Principals and employees at school sites? These are essential employees and should be rewarded for their hard work accordingly. But then why are they confidential? So as a public, we're very confused about who you're really trying to give the raise to. Can they possibly be from Mars? How are confidential employees usually paid? By annual salary increase based on seniority, or is it based on job performance? If by job performance, do you evaluate them annually? Then wouldn't there already have a built-in mechanism for their, salary increase? If not, and then you want to give this, envelope increase to them, how are you going to distribute them across the board? Since everyone, is receiving a different salary at this time, how are you going to distribute that, big balloon of money? What is the total in monetary number on the table for the negotiation? I heard just now 140 employees. For how much are we talking about? $2 million, $5 million? Will that take from the classrooms because it's going to come from our operating budget? Meaning by giving these mysterious confidential employees, you're going to take away from the teachers, from our students in the classrooms? Can you please answer those questions? Where is the increase going to come from? Is it from Gavin Newsom? Can we ask the county to give us the money from Measure X that everyone is paying into anyways? Why can't we send Mr. Gray to harass Governor Newsom since, he had a surplus and now he is spending us into deficit again? We could have gotten some billions of dollars like he gave to communist China. Why didn't we ask for that? Why are we paying for our consulting businesses, lawyers that are always coming to us to take away from us and ask the taxpayers to pay more? I want to take care of people. I want to give these increases to the people, but you have to first tell us, who are they? How are you going to distribute the money? And do we have the money? I did not hear any of those being discussed. Thank you.
I'll just comment that when this comes before the board as an action item, that information will be provided. The purpose of tonight's workshop was to understand a concept, but all of the specifics related to what impact this has, just like we've done with our union contracts previously, you will be able to deal with at the board meeting. And just to be clear, confidential employees are only 3 administrative assistants at the executive level at the district office. It's not a large number of employees, and they're considered confidential because the type of issues they deal with specifically connected to the executive office, and all the other positions that are listed under tier 4 are everybody else who isn't a classified, which is all of our unions related, connected to 2 unions, and then all of our certificated, which is our teachers and all who have the credential to be an educator. So again, we'll be bringing more information to you at the board meeting.
Any other clarification from anybody? Okay, we have a second card, which is from Mike Arata. Wait, I'm sorry, Mike, you were 4.2, right? You're the next item. Okay, so we haven't done that yet. So I'm going to close public comment on this, what I'm calling 4.5.1, right? The public comment related to 4.1. And now we'll go to the second workshop topic, which is on board governance. Thank you, John Gray, for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. So within the context of this item, we are going to discuss our board governance handbook that was drafted by a committee, but related to that, any procedures or board policies that relate to any of that, the point is for this to just be a discussion about these items. And so one of the sections in the board governance handbook is on social media. And so Karen and Tara Lynn are here to help us with that.
Welcome, sir. Our colleague Gretchen Shipley is joining us from Carlsbad. She decided to avoid the Bay Area due to rain. Just kidding, keeping it light. And Gretchen is here to walk us through any of the questions you have in your handbook regarding social media. She's a woman who needs to be in 2 places at once in short order. So we are, thank you, President Hurd, opening your review of your governance handbook with the area of social media. So Gretchen can take any questions you have. And I did ask her if she would begin by just giving a top line on new laws and that are in effect. And then we'll just go from there with any questions you have, if you please. Thank you. I'm sorry for the quick move to the table here, a failure to use my manners and say good evening to all the trustees. Gretchen?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you all and meet you all virtually. Can you hear me okay, Terilyn and team? Great. So Terilyn's right. I think we did such a great job at the CSBA conference recently talking about social media. I have 3 school board meetings tonight to do some follow-up. And just as Terilyn said, I really enjoy working with your district. I've worked with your business department, your IT department, and your communications on district social media. But there's also been some recent legal updates regarding specific to board members. And that's what we recently talked about at CSBA. And so I know you have some new members here and there's new laws even for the returning members. So I just wanted to share those updates with you and take any questions you may have, because I know it's a tricky and sometimes confusing area of the law on how to navigate social media. So I'll just dive right into it. I know this is a governance workshop, so I don't know how far the new folks have gotten into the concept of the Brown Act, but I just want you all to know the Brown Act, the Open Meetings Law, recently was amended to basically prohibit board members from commenting or even liking, putting an emoji or a like or a heart symbol on another board member's social media. Just like you're not supposed to go and discuss public business at a restaurant on a non-agendized, have a non-agendized meeting. The Brown Act was updated to specifically now reference social media. So I just wanted to give you all that tip to refrain. If your colleagues, your other board members are out there engaging on social media, I strongly recommend that you not comment, like, heart, dislike, any emoji. Because it's now, and it's not just, I know with a traditional Brown Act, we were talking about a meeting requires a quorum. This is just one-on-one. So again, best practice, please refrain. If there's an issue, a concern about what a colleague is putting on social media, maybe we talk about it during an agendized meeting, or if it's grounds for closed session, then perhaps it can be discussed in closed session. But again, Brown Act, you should really refrain from commenting, liking on each other's, as long as I should clarify regarding district business. If one of you goes on a vacation and one of you wants to like it, that's okay. But you can see how that's a slippery slope from vacation to school district business. But if it's school district business, you're not supposed to engage online through social media. The next component is actually a lawsuit, a case law, a court decision that came out specifically about board members who created an open public forum on their personal social media pages. And so I just wanted to give you all sort of a heads up on what that looks like so you can be informed on how you want to proceed engaging on social media. So you all are public officials. And if you use your personal social media to discuss district business, you are creating a public forum where you can't limit posts, membership to others, to members of your community or the public, unless those posts aren't protected free speech. So basically, if you're a public official and you're talking about district business, you're potentially creating a public forum. The only speech that you could limit is if it was obscene, if it wasn't protected speech. If it's obscene, it's hate speech, it's harassment, defamation. But if it's just general point of view opinions about district operations, you may be inviting all those comments in. And not every board member intends to create a public forum on the personal social media page. So you have some options. One is you can turn off all your comments. You can refrain from discussing school district business on your personal social media. Or the third option is if you're going to discuss district business, just know that your hands may be tied in how much you can manage your comment section, because otherwise you may be suppressing someone's free speech. So most school board members try to keep their personal social media separate from, let's say, district social media. Your district also has its own social media pages. And so I don't know how necessary it is for you all as individuals to sort of repeat what the district already provides. You also have a public information officer that you should utilize. You have a framework and resources to connect with your community. And so I would just encourage you all to use those resources and those avenues for communication. But I know that's a little complicated because especially people who have just recently maybe gone through a campaign. I don't mean anybody in specific. I mean, in all school boards, if you have been really heavily engaged with your community through your social media. And now that you're a public official, the game sort of changes, that you're creating an open forum, and it's okay to create an open forum. But the challenge for you will be, you can't delete comments you don't like just because of their viewpoint. And it can say things like, I think you are the worst school board member ever. And you have to keep that up there, or else you're suppressing their free speech rights. I mean, if it's just their point of view and their opinion. So not everybody wants to invite that type of commentary on their social media page. Do you all have any, but those are the two big new updates. One is Brown Act, commenting on each other's pages, and the second is creating a public forum. I've done a lot of work for your district separately on the district social media management, but I'm talking specifically at this workshop about personal board member social media. Do you all have questions?
That kind of extrapolates or extends the second idea you were talking about. If a school board member is on a closed group, do they get into problems with that if they've now commented on a closed group that isn't open to the public, it's only open to the people who are allowed in that group? Does that get problematic? I mean, should we basically stay off of closed groups?
Two-part response. The case that came out was the school board member's personal social media. So it wasn't them engaging in another closed group in another forum. So the case didn't prohibit it. However, I do recommend that to the extent possible, you all avoid discussing district business in a closed group, because you're speaking, sometimes on behalf of the board, and not everyone has access. And it can be a recipe for trouble.
To clarify when someone asks a question in a closed group, or when someone, makes a statement there, we shouldn't be defending or engaging. Let our public information officer do that.
Yes, you have a PIO, and frankly, I see this even in my own community, that it's a no-win. Once you start engaging, they know you're watching, and they can really pile on. Unfortunately, social media can be used as a forum for bullying and harassment, and so it is preferred that school board members utilize the public information officer if you're going to do a clarification, like the example you brought up. But that component of free speech hasn't yet been tested. But I do think it's interesting, because if you all know how social media works, let's just say Facebook, if someone comments, even under that comment, it can start a new thread of engagement. And whether or not that's also a public official talking about district business, creating an open forum, but that forum in general was closed. And so does that somehow obligate it? That hasn't been tested before the courts yet, but I think it's a good question. And it's just the best practice is to avoid it.
Gretchen, if I can just ask a question that's crossed my desk, and there may not be case law on it. So I'm going to put it out there to say, we do have some closed groups in our district. They're not ours, but they are involving our community. Those closed groups are moderated by others, not to do with us. And sometimes in those closed group settings, those moderators decide when things can and can't be there. And the question, and again, it may not be tested in law yet, because somebody else has the right to shut people out or shut people down or include them, not include them. If board members or even staff, but I know we're a little different, are on those pages and somebody else shuts somebody down, what impact does that have on the board member? Or has that not yet been tested?
And that's the component that hasn't been tested. The rule that came out of this case was if you're a public official talking about district business, you're creating a public forum on your own page. But I agree with you. If you're in somebody else's forum, and like I said, you can start a thread that has 250 more comments. But just so you know, in the one on their own personal page, they were personally sued and lost, and it went up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal, the individual school board members. So you don't want to put yourself in that position. So my suggestion is to avoid it. The other challenge is when somebody else is moderating, the responses you might get are really nasty, and the district is powerless to control, to get them to remove anything, to take things down. I guess the individual board member could delete their comment that they originally made, but the lack of control, it's always better to go through official district communications or even a public board meeting. I mean, if people have grievances to air, that's probably the right place to do it, or perhaps clarification. You have a public information officer, you have district controlled social media, you have a public board meeting. I mean, there are forums for communication. Social media can be really tricky because of this whole new public forum concept. And just so you know that the case that went before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal was one person in 10 minutes made 260 comments that were identical. I think they call that spamming, and the person deleted them. And that's what the court found was suppressing free speech. I mean, nobody wants to put up with that. That's just obnoxious to have someone basically say, we think the district's doing a terrible job, whatever. It was all very negative, but they repeated it 260 times in 10 minutes. You shouldn't have to put up with that. But that court decision said, well, you created a public forum. You're going to have to, just like you listen to somebody in public comment, you're going to have to listen to it on your own personal Facebook page.
So just a nuance to that question though, because again, board members, you're free to go wherever you need to go within laws. If you want to be on social media pages, you can, and that's your business. But my question, if I can just repeat it, because sometimes in closed pages, it can get pretty rough, but a board member can choose to be there. If the moderator shuts it down, not the board member, is that board member in any vulnerable spot? Because sometimes moderators on closed pages do shut comments off, do delete people, do remove people. That is part of the process. And I just want to be sure very explicitly, is there any vulnerability? If a board member is willing to be, how difficult it gets doesn't matter. That's where they want to be. Is it a problem if the moderator shuts something down, not the board member? Under current law, that is not illegal. The moderator is not a public official. They didn't create an open forum. They're a parent, and they created a forum to bash the district, and that's their choice, and they have that right to. It's because the elevated status of a board member, an elected official, you all have less rights when it comes to creating free speech. But yes, to answer your question, if a moderator is deleting comments, they have the right to do that because they didn't create a free speech forum.
Yeah, I just want to address the vulnerability though, Gretchen, that if you are on a closed group and the vulnerability that you could be called into court or sued, and then you'd have to prove that you are not the person who actually removed the comment. So I just think there's a vulnerability there that I think that it's good to know about the vulnerability of it.
And I think the vulnerability also plays into, like I said, the lack of control. You might regret what you posted or what other people are saying. And again, other board members cannot comment on it. They can't explain it away. You can't like it, you can't dislike it because that's in the Brown Act violation. So it just can get really messy really quickly.
I had a comment on that. When I was first elected, I was given a lot of information about some of the new laws and things that came out around social media before this lawsuit. And in that information, and I don't know whether it was part of the law or maybe some advice that was put in there, but I was told to stay off of any closed group pages because somebody else is controlling exactly what Dr. Malloy said. who can, what comments are made and then which ones get in there and which ones don't, because that's a problem. So stay out of closed groups, basically.
And I agree, that's a best practice. I don't think we can mandate that of anybody. Because, but I do think, I mean, that is a best practice to stay out of closed groups that are talking about district business.
And because I'm aware of some of your questions, that's the reason why I pushed that issue. And I think what I'm hearing, and I'm just going to correct for understanding, is there is best practice, which you can take or leave, but it's not illegal at this point. And I think there's a line between those.
Correct.
Whether it becomes illegal at another point, if that becomes the next level of case law that might get brought into a discussion around freedom of speech and such. What I'm hearing you say, Gretchen, is that hasn't been tested at this point. So it is not illegal, but you're hearing about some of the challenges that could exist. And then it's your choice to decide how you want to proceed. Did I understand what you're saying properly?
Yes, and it's also not illegal to create a public forum. It's just your hands will be tied if you get comments that you don't like.
And if we were to comment into a public or a private Facebook group that's moderated, would it be a better practice to first create it on our trustee page and then share it to that page? So therefore it is first created in a public forum and then shared into a private group. Therefore you're allowing unfiltered public comment on your page, as well as it can also be commented on in a private Facebook group. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're saying, should we first craft the response through the district's Facebook page? It's always a preference.
Through the trustee's own Facebook page. So I have a personal Facebook page and then I have a Facebook page. And so if I was wanting to share something with multiple groups, and it could be parent groups, it can be community-based groups, but they are going into a moderated private Facebook page, meaning that not everybody's let in, not all comments are approved by the moderator. But if I first share it publicly on my public forum that I've created on my page, and then share that into a group, does that create better insularity for me?
I think it might be just the opposite, because it sounds like if you're creating if you're on your personal page, if you're creating comments related to you are very much so creating a public forum.
So sorry, Gretchen, not personal page, my trustee Facebook page.
Which is already public.
Which is already public. There's no limitation on comments or on membership.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Yes, then I think that would be a cleaner approach. I think just simply sharing something, it's the engagement in those closed environments that can get really messy, and you lack the control. I mean, if you really feel compelled to share something in a closed group, then I suppose that's one way to go about doing it, is sharing it from your personal, but I still think it's better to go through the district ultimately, where the district has
not from my personal page, from my trustee page. Yeah, it's okay.
What if someone else takes the post that you put on your trustee page and shares that into a private group from their personal? If your trustee page is open to the public, people can grab and share with it. I mean, you're putting it out there that they can, you're not engaging in the closed forum, somebody else is, and they're using your information. So that's fine.
Yeah, it kind of seems like the legal part is that we have to keep things public. I think our attorneys are cautioning us about, be careful what you do there, because you might not like what comments. But if we're approaching it from, look, we're trying to engage our community. We want our constituents to know what we care about. We want our constituents to see us at schools and those kind of things. It's like coming at it from two different places of good, right?
The double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Right. And just to add, I think that we're moving into a new frontier. Social media is becoming whatever it's going to become next. And what becomes challenging, for example, is you may be comfortable starting any line of discourse in your own trustee space. But the point that I think Gretchen's underlining is if it goes to wherever it goes, you're the only one that can do anything about that. Another board member can't do anything to support you. And frankly, we're trying as a staff not to spend a lot of time on the closed pages, not because we're making any comment about them, because we can't sustain it. So we did try for a period of time to be more engaged in the closed pages. It didn't work, and we've pretty much pulled out. So we as a staff can't assist you if it goes in certain ways. So you would have to be very willing to simply deal with whatever comes, because as Gretchen's saying, and as all of us have experienced, the threads can go in a lot of different ways. They could be as inaccurate as they are accurate. And again, you would then have to make the decision that you're going to manage that in your space, because we may not choose collectively to do something in the district space to deal with that, because what that can mean is we're just jumping all over the place with whatever issues are coming. So there's no prohibition to what you may want to do, even though Shelley, I realized that what may have sounded like a best practice versus illegal could have been interpreted by you 2 years ago as you can't do this. You can, but there are cautions. And I just wanted to be clear from a staff perspective, the reason we don't go into those spaces anymore is because it's not sustainable for us. What you decide to do as an elected official is your business.
Can I ask a question kind of aside from the private groups? So if you just have your private Facebook page, you don't have a separate trustee Facebook page, and you want to post that you visited school, you would have to make that post public, right? Because you can do that. You can actually make an individual post public. And then would that kind of work through any legality issues?
So the case that determines that the board members had created a public forum, they were doing things like summarizing board meetings, saying we have a vacancy on our CBOC. So that's sort of similar to what you're saying is like I visited a school site. What the case said is it makes your whole account public.
Well, so you can in Facebook, I'm talking specifically about Facebook. You can make a specific post public. You can make a specific post private to only 3 people. Like you have that ability to kind of manage that portion of it. So can you legally, or the way that all of this is panning out, could I on my personal page post visit and then make that specific post public, even though my account is not public, but that post is public. So anyone can comment on it, anyone can see it. It'll show up in people's threads. They can share it, all of those things.
Yeah, I have the same question. And I think basically what constitute, when you make an open forum, is it a post or do you have to make the whole account?
So the case said the whole account, but the case was actually dealing with Twitter. I think it was Twitter and it might have been Facebook, but they didn't make the settings the way that you're proposing. So would that reduce your chances? I mean, it sounds like what you're proposing sounds like, look, when we talk about district business, we make it public and that makes sense to me. That sounds like a good plan. It's untested. This is new territory. So there's a risk that a court would say your whole count have to be open to the public. But I think what they were really concerned about was comments about district's business need to be open to the public. So if you want to configure your account that way, I can't promise you that would hold up in court, but it sounds like a lot more defensible than what happened in the decision's called Garnier, just so you all know, Garnier. And the other thing I want to remind you about is another option is just turn off comments. I mean, you can say, we have a board meeting next Tuesday, comments are off. And then you're not, I mean, what you're not supposed to do.
Everyone.
But that's for the individual post. I'm not turning off my comments for my whole private account. I'm just turning off my comments for the post.
Well, where this can get tricky, what the rule is, you're not allowed to discriminate or suppress speech based on someone's viewpoint. And so if you turn off all comments, you're treating everybody the same. You're not discriminating based on viewpoint. If you are turning off comments just on some posts, but not others, I think there's an argument that you could be suppressing people who just, I mean, it depends on what the subject matter of the post is. But
I think if I'm understanding Board Member Bratt's point, I'm just going to clarify something. The reason why, even though I'm not an elected official and the staff isn't, many of us separate personal from professional so that we never have a problem. And personal is locked down because it's not board business at all. And professional is board business, and total access on the board business side and no access on the personal side. And I know many superintendents do the same thing. Twitter's a little different because I personally will only use it professionally because there is no easy way to do it in the same way as far as I'm concerned. So again, I think we're getting back into, if I may, best practice, separate. If you're not separated, you could be okay, but I'm hearing Gretchen say it hasn't fully been tested. And then we don't, being the test case might not be the most attractive scenario. That's just what I'm hearing you say, Gretchen.
yes,
You guys who started with social media, and I know Laura, you did this, and Jesse, you have, where you created a trustee page right when you were elected, your following's gonna come. I kind of followed your lead and created a trustee page, which I'm trying to use with this separation that John's talking about, but I don't have as many followers on that page. So it's, I was doing this thing where I'm reposting to my own personal one. But again, that opens up this Pandora's box that Gretchen is talking about. So I'm going to stop that. But you know what I mean? It just, and then you kind of get at what is it all for, right? So we have to keep that in mind too.
Gretchen, one question too. Do you have any templated language that we could put on our social sites that would say something like, the views I express are my individual views and not the views of the board? Any likes or reposts do not necessitate support of, things like that?
Yes, I mean, that's a recommendation we have also. It's not bulletproof, but it doesn't hurt to put a disclaimer up in your bio that says exactly, what you just said, that you're not intending to create a public forum. These are my personal views, not those of the district. And so it can't hurt. It's not, if you put a disclaimer up there and then you turn around and violate it, it won't really hold any water. But I definitely think it helps demonstrate what your intent is in creating in your speech and in your forum that you're creating, whether it's a limited forum or a public forum. So I'd be happy to share with the team some sample language.
That would be excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
Can I ask?
I know this is frustrating. I want to tell you, we went to the CSBA conference. We had a room of 250 school board members, and it was an hour and a half of saying, but what if this, what if that, what if that? It's a frustrating dynamic. I sympathize with you because no one's trying to get in trouble and navigate, and we're all on social media every day, and you want to engage with your community. I get it. So I'm just trying to give you some food for thought, going forward.
Can I ask, just kind of thinking in the future, so as an elected running for school board, with my public trustee page and my private personal page, both on Facebook and Instagram, and then Twitter is just kind of like what John said, just kind of a free for all, always professional. Is there anything, I mean, I don't even know where to start with a question, because I don't know what that is going to look like, because I don't know that, I just don't know.
You hit the nail on the head. What the biggest problem is going to be is when we run through another election cycle, people running, when you're not an elected official, it's not an issue. But when you are an elected official rerunning for your seat, you really are going to have to keep it separate if you don't intend to create a public forum, if you want to maintain some sense of privacy on your personal page. And so that's going to be really tricky. I also have heard from the plaintiff, the defendant, who is a school board member, that they're trying to appeal this to the California Supreme Court because they think it's a really challenging, unworkable framework. But this is a published decision from the Court of Appeal for school board members as it stands right now in California. But so hopefully by next election, we may get some clarification from the California Supreme Court, is what I'm saying.
Thank you.
And I work regularly with your team on social media for the district. So I don't, if there are follow-up questions, I am happy to answer those or work to the extent we could do so within the framework of the Brown Act, work with people individually. But that should all go through one central person at the district. But I'm happy to be an ongoing resource for you to the extent you have any follow-up questions.
And I was going to say to that end, if you have any specific questions and if you send them to Cindy, we will be able to follow all Brown Act requirements to be sure Gretchen assists us.
And will you share the answers with all of us?
So the way we'll do that, just so again, if we get a question, we'll handle it effectively. Gretchen will assist us and then we'll inform everybody of the response. So even if it wasn't your question, it may be your question tomorrow. So we might as well do it all at one time.
Thank you. Anything else on social media, trustees?
I have something, but it's under social media, but it's about email. So,
Okay.
oh, okay. So just in the bylaws, where we talk about electronically transmitted suggestions or issues will be sent to the superintendent for appropriate response and distribution. Oh, no, it's
It's in the.
yes, I'm sorry. I was thinking it was something else. But anyway, I'm curious because you have or add to the board issues bin, which I've never heard of. So I don't know if that's anything that I should be aware of or what that is. Just want to get a definition.
I don't know where
since
that
it's in
came
the
from
bylaws.
either.
Really quickly, y'all, I apologize, but I have another school board meeting that I need to jump over to. I think the email question can probably be answered by my colleagues who are there. Is that okay if I get going?
Great, thank you.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. It was great to meet you all. Take care.
So do we know what this bin is? I don't know what it is either. So we will fix that.
I do.
What is it?
I was waiting for the Jeopardy music.
It's a basket.
That when first we met, we looked at examples from other districts, and this actually is in Dublin's district, and it practices when they meet and review these things. Sometimes they're addressed immediately, and sometimes they're just put in a bin, and the board looks at them later. So I think you probably want to scrub this from yours, as it is not your practice.
I think Cindy's the most effective bin we could
I
have.
think yes. Yes, just don't like or use an emoji. But I think we'll just scrub that, but that's where it came from. Okay, I think we'll go back to you, President.
Okay.
For your handbook. And Karen Sman, your general counsel, is here to take any questions for lawyers or questions that require common sense as well. She's good in both categories. There you go.
So while we framed this as board governance, policy, procedures, and bylaws, I think the most crucial thing is we're getting to the next step with this document because we would like to approve it and make it official, right, Cindy? And see Cindy nodding her head. But if in the process of reviewing it, you also noticed anything else in procedures, policies, or bylaws, we kind of want to discuss them.
And President Hurd, the only other thing that Cindy is leading is previous workshops. In previous workshops, you raised some things that you wanted to come back to. And so Cindy will be able to put those on the table for you to discuss here because we have a new board member so that there are no surprises should you want us to move in that direction when it comes to an actual board meeting for approval.
So let me ask, is your pleasure to just go through the document in those categories, or would we rather first have Cindy bring up the things that have been raised previously? What would you prefer?
The items that were raised previously relate to board bylaws, not the governance
Then
handbook.
let's do those first if nobody has any objection. Go ahead.
Okay, at your October 14th, 2022 workshop, there were two items that you discussed, but you wanted to wait for your new board member. And the first was on board bylaw 9320, which is meetings and notices. And currently the board bylaw reads, and you agreed to, regular meetings shall be held at 7 p.m. at the 699 Old Orchard Drive, Danville, California location. And you wanted to discuss whether you wanted to continue with the 7 p.m. start time for regular meetings.
There was kind of a proposal to move it to 6 o'clock, but we didn't know what kind of schedule the incoming board member had and didn't want to just change that before you got here.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and a little bit of history too. I think the bylaws actually said 6, but then at some point down the road, it had shifted to 7. Is that correct?
The 6, we can't figure it out. I think
Okay.
it was a mistake because when I joined the board, the meetings were at 7:30 and it was a big deal when we moved them to 7.
Okay. And the part of the context too is that means then that closed regularly starts at 5:30, often starts at 7, sometimes starts at 6. But so if we move it to 6, then it'll sometimes start at 5, regularly start at 4:30, often start at 4. So
Yeah, so closed meeting would start at 4 at that point. And what have we, I mean, we've been doing starting at 6, said public
meetings
public
starts at
7,
7
but
and
closed.
closed is
6-ish.
always an
Okay.
hour, but
Yeah.
sometimes an hour and a half. And when there's meaty stuff to deal with, 2 hours.
Well, and I guess, thank you for taking me into consideration for that too, but also with the goal of engaging more of the public, what have we found actually engages the public more? To do an earlier meeting so that when we're starting our open meeting, they're not looking at a 10 p.m. stop or what? What's the?
And again, I think some
That's-
of this deals with the COVID shifts of more people working from home or, and we are meeting only once a month. We used to meet more typically twice a month. There's more I would point out there's more to cover in our meetings because we're meeting less often. And so that extra hour might not push us up against the 10 o'clock need for an extension all the time. So
Okay, so would it be correct to say that if we do shift to starting the meetings earlier, so public meetings starting at 6, that's the new proposal? And then that would give, it seems like it might actually encourage more participation from the public to be able to 6 and not have to stay till 10. Is that, would
I
that
think
be
it
your
might be
understanding?
harder for some people to get here with 6 with kids' activities
Yeah.
and stuff. But the whole push it to 10 or later, I think is really hard on a lot of people too. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like,
6 of one, half dozen the other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of indifferent, to be honest, so I would defer to what you guys feel is the best practice and I can make it work with my schedule.
have we had anyone in the public talk about this, ask for it to be earlier, say that it's too late, say that have we had any kind of?
The only comments I've received are that it would be great if you didn't have to go so late. The late piece bothers some people. I'm only smiling because many of you know I'm a late owl. It certainly doesn't bother me, but it bothers more people than I realized when we are still here, sometimes till 11.
I imagine that too, especially if you've got little kids, you want to be engaged in the public discussion and your public, comment that you want to, or your agendized item that you want to make comment on, it's starting at 9:15 and you have to sit through the whole meeting, etc.
we also have more student engagement than we've had in the past. We
Yeah.
have a student board member and they're here as long as we are usually. So
The only thing I'll add for your consideration, with all due deference, is while we want our meetings to be accessible to the public and we want to see them as engaged as they want to be, you also want to consider your staff. And it can be hard on your staff to be involved in meetings and late nights and then returning early in the morning. So it's just a consideration of the principals who want to stay and hear the entire discussion but need to be back at school early. So for your thought.
that's how we moved it from 7:30 to 7 because it was really late.
One thought, one idea, because that's what I do, but is to then when we have those really meaty closed sessions, because I just worry as someone who works full time that having a regularly starting at 4 or 3:30 sometimes is going to be a little. 3:30 I guess would never happen, would it? 4 might happen, but anyway, if there is that more of an option to limit that early closed session to an hour and a half, so that then if it needs to go longer, then we go on the tail end.
That's a good point.
As opposed to we're just going to stack up on the front. And that doesn't have to be a policy. That can just be
Kind of a rule of thumb when
Right,
we're agenda
right.
planning.
So that would be like a return to closed session after open
Right.
session.
Yeah.
If needed, maybe twice a year, it would happen, right?
Yeah.
And I think I can add that at Cabinet, we've talked about how we can be most succinct while still providing you all the information in closed session and allow you to drive the conversation related to what additional information you need. In other words, it's something I think we can improve upon as well, so that that time spent together is really tight in the best sense of that word.
Okay, so we wouldn't be taking action. We would be kind of getting a consensus that we would then put forward into something we would take action on at an upcoming meeting. So it kind of sounds like maybe we ought to try this, start at 6, kind of rule of thumb, closed session no earlier than 4:30 and see how it goes. Is that fair?
And President Hurd, if for whatever reason you want to revisit this, it's not hard to do. In other words, we can try this for a period of time and revisit if it seems not to be working with people's schedules or what we're hearing from the public or what have you.
Yeah, that would be my biggest concern, would just be the, what is in the best interest of the public, I mean, I think there's a lot more concern than just that, but that's definitely. And so the idea of, I like the idea of starting at 6. But I wouldn't want us to make that kind of a change without the idea of maybe there's some flexibility in terms of changing it back if it's not working. So.
Okay. Next item, Cindy.
Thank you. We'll make that change and bring it to you at the January 17th board meeting. The second item relates to board bylaw 9322 related to consent agenda. And this policy is set to come back to you for approval at the January 7th board meeting, but you wanted to discuss a little bit about how you currently handle the consent agenda. And there has been some update and language from CSBA. I'm going to read that quickly to you, and then you can discuss current practice and how, if you might want to change it. It says that in order to promote efficient meetings, the board may bundle a number of items and act upon them together by a single vote through the use of a consent agenda. Consent items shall be items of routine nature and items for which board discussion is not anticipated and for which the superintendent recommends approval. When any board member requests the removal of an item from the consent agenda, the item shall be removed and given individual consideration for action as a regular agenda item. It goes on to say the agenda shall provide an opportunity for members of the public to comment on a consent agenda item unless such item has been previously considered at an open meeting of a committee comprised exclusively of board members. And that's where it ends. Your current practice has been to allow the community to pull a consent agenda item, review it, publicly comment on it, and then take action on it. And the update from the CSBA states that while the community can make a comment, a public comment, it does not require a separate action or to be placed in as an action item. And I'm going to look to Karen to confirm that I have this correct and add anything that's necessary, and then ask you for discussion.
I'm reading what I have, and that's not what I have, Cindy. So do you have what you were? Thank you. Okay, so the agenda. Yeah, I don't have any addition to it. It's just a change from what your policy has been. So I don't have any recommendation. I think you can.
So in terms of implementation of that, if someone had a member of the public, not a board member, but a member of the public had a concern about an item on the consent agenda, when we are on the approval of the consent agenda action item, would be when they would put their card in for that. They could then say, I have concerns about item 11 point blah, 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 12, I guess it would be 12 point blah, blah, blah. And they would state them there. Then if a board member also now said, oh, I'm worried about that too, the board member could then request the item to be removed. But if none of the board members have a concern, the item would still be included on consent, but it would give the member of the public an opportunity to voice a concern, but then it doesn't necessarily move it to action. And I think we would want to, I would clarify that the first time we did it, first few times we did it, so that members of the public would be aware of that.
Public has the right to comment. Only the board has the right to remove it and vote on it separately.
Yeah. I think that would help things.
So this board policy will be coming to you on January 17th with the new CSBA language. And again, you had reviewed this on October 14th. It was really just to discuss the practice and the change in practice. And then we would need to work with our communications department to communicate that to the community.
All right.
Those are the two items that I had. And I know that President Hurd, you have a third item from our community member.
Yes, Mr. Arata brought forward the idea. Actually, would you like to just talk to your item and then I'll summarize what I was going to say? Since you're here.
Thank you. I have recommended several times in the past that you consider including in your minutes of meetings a summary of what public comment has come forward, so that people who are looking at those minutes understand what the issue was. And I'd like to see that include more than just the name of the speaker and timestamp in the video. Those are both helpful, but much more helpful if there's a quick summary for people who look just at your minutes and knows where then to look for more detail. Some reasons I forwarded for that recommendation: you regularly characterize members of the community and parents especially as your partners. In my view, partners and their input, especially when they take the time and trouble to come to one of your meetings, deserve a public notice with something more than just timestamps. And I'm talking about a short summary. Your speaker cards themselves, these, actually ask for a quick summary on the part of the speaker. And so it wouldn't be a big deal for that speaker to say, okay, in 20 words or less, name a total. I think mine for this evening is 18 words and 2 plus signs. And so it'd be easy matter for the speaker, if he or she wants to see it summarized, to include a proposed summary in that speaker card. It would otherwise, if there's no summary, be up to the board secretary to create such a summary. And Cindy would be fully adept at doing that. Even the Contra Costa Board of Supervisors, with a much larger jurisdictional footprint and a much longer agenda, typically, their meetings go all day when I've attended those. They have a process where they do provide relatively instructive summaries of comments at those meetings. So you can tell what actually happened in that person's comment. As another example, consider the Acalanes Union School District with a student population of about 1/5 of yours. They too provide for such comment summaries. So from large to small, other jurisdictions in this county provide for the kind of summary that I'm proposing. These kinds of matters do bring up public interest kinds of comments, which deserve a public notice that doesn't require looking up a video with a timestamp to have any idea what the public commenter said. And reason number 4, not including such summaries by students, parents, and other stakeholders in the district, citizens at large, leaves the impression of a governing board seeking to impede public perception of important board meeting content. Further, your meeting guidelines and norms under discussion mention a focus, this is what's under discussion this evening, a focus on students' needs and treating everyone with dignity and respect, quote unquote. You aren't the only ones concerned about student needs. I'm a former teacher back in the 70s and 80s, and treating everyone with dignity and respect would include reporting on the issues which citizens bring to your attention, and they hope to public attention at large. So I think it's not a big deal for you to add this simple item in your board minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to start in terms of reacting to this. I think what Mr. Arata is proposing is reasonable, but I would like to provide some context. We used to do this, and over time, it became a very challenging thing for Cindy as the person recording the minutes to capture, succinctly what someone was saying and then deal with the, no, that's not what I meant, and no, I want, and she had to deal with a lot, and it was very time consuming. So I like the concept of allowing folks to write in that box, and we limit it by perhaps 20 words, 15 words, whatever we think is appropriate. But if they choose to leave it blank, I don't think it should fall on staff to have to come up and summarize what they said in 3 minutes, because while they're perfectly capable, you've made a reference in your email about, command of English language and stuff, but it's challenging to summarize what someone said and to do it accurately. And then it's the back and forth about, that's not what I meant, I want you to edit it, that they really don't have time for. So what do you guys think about?
Yeah, no, I agree, because it's not really just summarizing, but it's interpreting, right? It's actually, if it's the nuances and stuff. And so if the speaker really didn't mean that, and but it's up to Cindy to.
And we
kinda-
might need a caveat about if there's, profanity or inappropriate
right.
language, we're going to edit that. We're not just going to let it be somebody's billboard.
Right, but no, to the point that if it's on a card and it's a comment that from the speaker, and those are their words, we should put it on it.
You look like you want to say something. Karen, go ahead.
It does address in some sense that this is what was discussed.
So at least the topic, and maybe we even modify what I was suggesting so that it's briefer, but it's just the topic rather than a statement.
That's what your Bible says.
And that's something that has been missing since we went to just putting the YouTube link. So I mean, I understand Mr. Arata's concern.
Do we know with the city council that summarizes or the county that summarizes, do they just do the topic or do they do a statement?
In the examples Mike included in his email, they actually, the county one, they use an example interpreting what a very angry caller had said. And I mean that, when you have all that emotion in there, I think it's putting way too much onus on an employee to interpret that. And I don't think we want to be doing that.
No, I agree.
Right now, is if what you're suggesting is having someone write what they talked about, I would be wary of also deleting some of the verbiage that they're using from. So.
Right. That's why I think a word limit and what do you guys think? A topic? I mean, let me use Mike's as an example. Yeah. Well, I'll just read it. It says we need to have his, name in front of it, but recommendation to include a summary of each public comment in board meeting minutes. Name plus timestamp plus short summary.
Yeah, I agree that I think that putting the burden of creating the statement on someone else is not fair to the speaker, and it's not fair to the person who has to create it. There's bias involved on all sides. And so I think that's just, that's not really what we want. I would recommend that there's a word limit. I would also recommend that it's clearly stated on the yellow card that this will be listed, and if you want a statement list or a topic, whatever, however we want to phrase it, listed, that please write it here. And educate the public that this is what this is for now, so that they know that they can do it, and they also know that they don't have to do it. So it becomes on them.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a spot where they can write more. I mean, if someone wanted to pull the card, they could look at it. But I think the gist of what you're getting at is before you take the time to go look up the YouTube timestamp, you want to know what it's about before you bother, right? And so I think in that sense, and that our bylaws say it's supposed to be there, we need to include at least what the topic is.
And I agree. I like including that public comment. It's more user friendly probably for those minutes as well. But I do think that if it's up for interpretation, we are going to end up with people who are unhappy with it. However, if it's their own words that they decide to put on this comment card, I think that's great. Another thing to even take it further and maybe more user friendly is these timestamps. So I was thinking also about if there's a way where these timestamps can also now be like a real hyperlink that takes you to the YouTube section in that page. So for example, if we've got the timestamp at 53 minutes and 12 seconds, Mr. Arata is commenting on this, right? And then it hyperlinks directly to the page. Is that already built in, or it's typically a PDF that we're looking at?
It's not built in at this time, but as I look across the room at my colleague, who is our technology expert, he is shaking his head that we can't do that.
And I think that would be great. And then even including some of that maybe in the description for the YouTube video too. So if people want to look that up and say, here's where comments are for, we don't have to get crazy with timestamps, but the more user friendly it can be, because I think that's the thing too. Sometimes people in the public go, well, I was really interested in that topic, but I didn't really care about the budget discussion or something like that. And they can click on that and go right to that and get a little bit of context and decide to watch back or forward more. I don't know. I think it could be, especially in our world of 30-second video clips. We don't watch 2-hour clips.
So when we make the change to the other platform that will have the agenda and the minutes and all that, that will be doable. So that'll be a future thing, but not too far away future thing.
Love
I'm
it.
really excited about when we have live links and I don't have to scroll through 300 pages.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay. All right. Is that enough guidance there? Okay. All righty. So we just start at the top of the governance document. You guys bring up issues that you have. Is there another? We're still on this item, but did you want to talk about that particular one? We're still on 4.2. It was just, we took his card because we were talking about the issue he had brought forward. If you have, let me look on your card and see what you wrote. And if it, we'll bring it up. I know you had 4.2, but generally. So can we have our discussion about items? And when we get to the one you wanted to talk about, you just raise your hand, okay? Yeah, no, I understand. Sorry for the confusion. Okay, I need to restart to get to my governance thing, but if someone wants to start with the first topic, go right ahead. My computer closed.
So the first thing that I noticed wasn't until, I guess it's page 7 of the PDF, which is not page 7 of it's page 5 of the bylaws, but under the affiliation with school board associations. I don't know if we
I had
want to start there. You have one
Does
before that?
Anybody have one like here? I'm
Okay.
sorry. Meeting guidelines, norms, and the board adopted Rosenberg rules. Anything there?
I just want to stress that the final bullet point on this page, which is protecting confidentiality of closed session, is for the rest of your life. And just make sure, I don't know that the public necessarily understands that, but it's important that we do. And that confidentiality is covers quite a bit of territory. We don't have to get into it right now, but specifically employees and students. Employee and student matters are highly sensitive, often topics of controversy in the public where people want clarity around what's happening, and they can be complicated for us. As a former trustee, I say that it's most especially difficult when you bump into someone and they know you and love you and they just want to know what's going on. So Karen is going to want to confidentiality, not at this point before we leave this evening, but I did want to stress for closed session, it is confidential words, writing, and body language. Because as we all know, it's all 80% body language. So that kind of wink and a nod is going to be trouble.
And I'm looking at the time. It's 4 minutes to 6. Can we go longer or do we need to extend? Do people have commitments? You think half an hour? Or is everyone able to stay another half an hour? Do we need a motion? Okay,
So moved.
motion, please. Thank you,
Second.
Laura.
Second.
Second from Susanna.
The motion was made by Board Member Bratt and seconded by Board Member Ordway. Roll call vote, Board Member Van Zee. Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Jump into the next session board agenda. One thing I noted was the thing we already covered, so. Board meeting protocol. Closed session.
Board meeting protocol, President Hurd, I'll just I want to clarify, you don't need to amend this document, just make sure you all understand that you'll move from a staff report to public comments, board discussion. It is perfectly acceptable, in fact, encouraged if you have questions that mirror or underscore what you heard from the public. Even that's a good time to say, what I'm hearing out there is the following, please address it. It does say then you move on to a motion and a vote, but there are times you will turn it back to staff and say we need more information. So it doesn't always move to a motion and a vote. A good question to ask as a trustee is, can we hold this and bring it back to the next meeting, or is there a deadline? Dr. Miller, we absolutely have to meet, but it doesn't always move to a vote. Sometimes we need more information from staff. So I just want to make sure that it's clear.
And there is that point in there where a board member can make a motion, or sometimes when no one has, the president asks for one. I would just like to say, I think it's perfectly appropriate for another board member to say, wait, I'm not ready. I have further discussion. Because I remember one time that happened with you. We rushed you and we didn't realize we were rushing you. And just for openness and candorness and collegiality, let's just be comfortable with. We're not going to force a vote through to when you're not ready. Even though I know some places do. Closed session. Or if you want to cover confidentiality, this is a great time. So yeah, good.
That's what happens in closed session, but it's forever, so it's. And so it might be hard sometimes when you are. And remember that is something that I have. Or the only one that can have to. That's very important. It's also important to understand the police. So we have to make sure what you're saying in the session is confidential. I like to say that in fact, it spans from session and that session. Asking questions. Maybe bringing a topic. Or the deciding. So that is really important. There are things that you speak about in closed session. There's also certainly to bias yourself by not things that you might find. That's also addressing. Yeah, I would just say, again, drawing from my own experience, I would never hesitate in closed session to turn to your counsel and say, we are going to get questions about this because human beings don't evaporate. They're going to want to know what happened. Will you please give us something that we can say, because I'm not comfortable saying no comment. I think it's also important to just use that as an opportunity to just build confidence in the process. It's okay to say, I hear worry in your voice, I hear concern, I can't talk about it,
for legal reasons, not personal choice reasons, legal reasons. But the district's on it, right? You want to just, there's something you can say, as long as it's true, right? I mean, certain advisors stick to the truth. But in closed session, you can turn to counsel. And I remember this is actually how I ended up in this job. I'm not a lawyer, right? But I remember saying, I'm not saying a comment with 4 newsman's parked in front of that school. So what can I say? And usually you can say more than no, a lot more than no comment. Outside in the world, when people come up to us and want to share information about it, student matters, employee matters, what have you, we don't advise board members to move that into the process so that you deflect and get out of the way of staff. It's not designed to do that. It's really that ultimately a decision about discipline might come to you in closed session. And if you got too close to that information, I'll tell you, I worked with a board where 4 people showed up on a campus when there was something going on, and they meant well. They all live in the community. It's a small community. 2 of them were brand new to the board. They thought they needed to get over there as a show of support, and 4 of them had to recuse themselves from a decision that came before they had an independent body in there. And that's our job. Unlike other elected positions, you're everything. You're judicial, your policy, you're all of it. So when people are trying to pull you in and they need you and they want you, Laura, to hear them, it's best for us to really understand the structure. And if you're not clear where the structure and where to put their voice, if you're not clear on that, John Malloy, Dr. Malloy would help you with that. That isn't because we don't care. It's just because you do. And that job's going to come to you in session. So parents don't understand that. They just think, will you give me a minute? I really need to explain to you what happened at school or what happened. So, the most, I think, challenging situations for us as trustees, at least as what I observed today by working with 600 districts up and down the state, when social media is on fire and the information is wrong, and people are talking about kids or adults and we want to correct it, we really can't talk about kids and adults. That's where you really want to rely on the staff. And I will say you have a staff that is incredibly vigilant about saying as much as possible to be honest and open with the community. But you want to be very mindful that kids and employees are comfortable. Any questions there, or just any? I know you're all very.
I do wonder though, if what you said about how you could force yourself to be reclused might be a really helpful thing to say to the parent, because if they trust you enough that they're talking to you about it, they'd like you to be on the judge, jury, and not leave it to somebody else.
I would, absolutely, Rachel. There were times I'd say, listen, this could very well end up before us as a board, and I want to be able to do my job. And so I'm really encouraging you to go back to the principal, go to Christine Ward, go to wherever they belong. I would also sometimes take the time to explain that if I was going to court over traffic violations, which for the record would never happen, in case my husband's listening, whoopsie. If I were parking tickets, what have you, and my neighbor's the judge and I'm going to be there, I wouldn't knock on my neighbor's door and say, oh, Susanna, do you have a minute? I'm going to see you tomorrow. I just want to fill you in. You're the body that's going to be making a decision. When people come to you with their heart full and they're worried and they think they know things that you should know, meet that worry. You know how to do that. I hear worry in your voice. Please take my advice. You need to go speak with so-and-so. And Dr. Miller, I'm going to turn to you at this point and ask, if they say I'm not going to speak with a teacher, I'm afraid of, sometimes we hear retribution, right? Not to imply that happens here. I'm just saying, we'll hear that from parents. I'm not going there. How about the principal? Not going to happen. What do you want them to do if a parent says, I'm not going there? I am so uncomfortable that it could be more uncomfortable for my child. Would you want the board member to suggest, then I'll do you a solid, and I would say, call the district office and I'll let them know you're calling. How do you want them to handle that?
So preferably, issues are dealt with as close to the issue as possible. Because even if someone at the district office is listening to that issue, and I'll answer your question explicitly in a minute, in the spirit of due process, in order for us really to get to the bottom of the issue, we have to bring those concerns to the person who may be causing those concerns. So that person, maybe a teacher, et cetera, can speak also to the concern. So that whole notion of, I want you to know, but I don't want my identity to be known, doesn't mean we can't do anything, but it does limit what we can do. Having said that, in order for any member of our community to avoid feeling that kind of fear or anxiety, each school has a supervisor. The supervisor for each school is listed on our website. They should go to that supervisor, and if they simply want to share their concerns and say, but I don't want anything further being done, that is their prerogative. And depending upon the type of action they are looking for, the supervisor is in a position to be able to facilitate that. And that, I think, is the best process to follow.
And John, when you say go to the supervisor, you mean email them?
We have email addresses on the web. I don't know if we have phone numbers as well on the website, but we can, go ahead, Cindy.
We do have their district phone number.
Yeah, so there's phone, email, but that would be
Just
our,
wanted to clarify because
that would be the recommendation, just so that then we can, keep confidence if that's what's asked, or take the issue as far as we are able and do our very best to mend relationships. Because if someone is feeling that level of anxiety, it is my experience that there may be some things really challenging in the relationships that need to be addressed as well. So
Or they just may be a new parent worried about. So anyway, I just want to walk through that. That's the sort of the clunky thing out there in the field right now. And I also understand that when a community member comes to you, they're looking for a resolution, right? And so I think it's also important for you to tell community members that I am one of 5. And the only way, a board can act is by majority act of those 5. And so turning them back to, and also your board bylaws say that you're not going to get into the functions of your administrative staff. So I think it's really important for you to explain that. And I do think it's important for them to explain, I can't help you, but I can get you to the person that can, and then refer it over to the person that can help. And understanding what your processes are, because your board policies, your administrative regulations, they have a whole set of what processes are for different kinds of issues that you have. And in fact, if as a board, you've ensured there's a process and a place for voices, you have done your job, because your job is structure. Your job is the vision, the direction, policies, the structure of the organization. So there's a place for voices. You're not the 800 number.
Can I clarify something? Just especially since I'm new, I want to make sure that I understand this. We were talking about how we're like the appellate body, and were you saying to not, like if somebody comes up with an important topic that you got to know these details, were you saying listen but don't comment, or try to also not absorb that information as well?
I'm going to give you a real life example. I live in the Bay Area. I'm an attorney. I represent multiple school districts. I have a lot of friends that go to different school districts all over the county or in the area. A lot of people at parties will come up to me and say, I hear you represent schools, or I hear you do education law. They will start giving an example or saying something. And what do I say? I actually politely say, I'm so sorry. You should not tell me this, because I am not the person to tell you, because I represent that school district. And anything you tell me, I'm going to tell them. And so I use that as an example, because as a board member, it's similar that you might be the appellate body. So if you get a lot of information and the opinion of what that community member has to say, you may end up biasing yourself and not being able to make a decision, and not when you come to whether it's an appellate decision. Some of your board policies, you are the appellate body, and some you are the ultimate decider. So what I'm suggesting is that you redirect, if you will,
take what is the issue and then let me redirect you to the appropriate person to respond to your concern or complaint. If you, does that make sense?
Yeah, but if, and I guess what you're also saying too, if it's not some decision like that, it's like, I'm really frustrated that we don't have more monkey bars in our school, you know, something like that. It's like, oh, that's a, great point. Maybe we should talk to so and so who's going to do all these planning.
Right. And so you just want to say if that's how you feel, you really should be speaking with the principal about that. They're responsible for the site. It's always going to depend on what comes to you. It's when people come to you and want to talk about it. Teachers or staff, and they start getting really deep into something. It just
There would be
just
more
say-
closed
just say,
session
You're,
topics.
you clearly have a lot you want to share, and I want to make sure you are sharing it with the right person. And so there's sometimes there can be those times you say, listen, this may very well end up and before the board. So I want to be able to do my job. But first and foremost, know this with fortitude. If you have a good process in place and places for voices like those principal directors that Dr. Malloy referred to, your director of equity and inclusion and so forth, you have first and foremost done your job. You have a structure for them. So yeah, but I remember living this and people would start to really get into detail and say, I got to stop you there. I really do. And you need to know I care. You need to go over here. Just go over there. And I sometimes, you might want to say, if you don't get a call, you can let me know. Dr. Malloy would want to know that from you as well, just to assure them that the organization cares, but you really want to step out of them thinking you're the one who's going to go solve the problem.
Because ultimately they want help.
Yeah.
And so if you're actually more effective by directing them to the correct people to help them, you're actually helping them more.
And the other thing I'd like to add is that it's another part of our practice that we let you know to the extent we can how the loop was closed. So you don't have to worry that there's a gap. So what I ask our team to do is not necessarily to get into all the details, but to say, we've reached out to the parent and there's a meeting scheduled for Wednesday. Like, just so that it didn't get lost in the atmosphere that there's actually a loop closed.
Okay, that's closed session. Let's move on to forward goals. Okay. Affiliation with School Boards Association. There's your item, Laura.
I have a couple of things. So on bullet number 3, as a district with more than 30,000 students, which we no longer have.
So we're going to lose that.
Well, I thought instead of that, it could be, because we may again have 30,000 students. So when the district has more than 30,000 students, SRVUSD is entitled to, because there may be a time where we'll go back to that.
Why don't we just say districts with more than 30,000 students are entitled to appoint a delegate?
Yeah.
The time my term started, we had 30 more than 30,000. Okay, Cindy? Okay, great. Do you have another one?
Just down in school visits. It's on the same
So pop down to school visits.
So under the second bullet point, school liaison assignments will be rotated yearly with new assignments made at the start of the school year. I know we've broached the topic of now that we are fully in by area electeds, of the idea of perhaps having schools assigned by area, and then also, having a conversation around how do we thread that line of being able to really build relationships within our area and support our area who elected us, at the same time make sure that we're casting a broad net across the whole district and supporting the whole district and seeing the district holistically, and engaging in schools outside of our area so that we can see the plurality of our unified school district,
So
right?
the challenge there is that the boundaries were set up so that they don't go into nice little groups of 5.
Right.
So it could be a really messy thing to move them around year to year. And okay, you get this one now and you get it this next year. I mean, I guess I would just put it out there. That was all done by design, really, really intentionally. Granted, it doesn't have to stay forever by the board that created it, but it was to really firmly make it clear that we represent every single student in this district, not just the ones whose parents elect us or neighbors elect us. I think the last few times we've shared the assignments, we haven't shared the whole groupings. And I think if we did, like what I shared with you, Jesse, you'd see the logic in it much more than when you just get your list.
Yeah, no, the list that I have has all of us in all the
Okay.
schools. Yeah.
Because I know, Shelley, at one point you said it didn't have any rhyme or reason. It does. It can be recarved up if it can be carved up better, but I think it's really important for us to rotate. And as long as you have, maybe they need to be mixed up more so that each of the 5 years you have 2 schools in your area or something like that. That could be.
I think it needs to rotate. I agree with that, but I think there's now got to be some sort of a balance that we try to strike, because we were at large before and we're not anymore. And so for us as representatives of our areas, as well as the whole school district, we need to have some of the more connection to the schools in our particular area. So even if we just carve them up differently, maybe, because they do need to
Before we
rotate.
did that, I'd like to encourage us to actually look at what we have and see if maybe it does cover things more than we realize, because it's not just a given elementary school's boundary and where the school, it's not where the school address is, it's the boundary.
Right.
And I would just like us to look at it before we.
Yeah,
all
and
together.
yeah, and I think, and maybe it's, instead of looking at reinventing it, maybe it's thinking of something in addition to the rotating school liaisons that allows us in our area to build long-term relationships with, whether it's a feeder pattern or a specific, I don't know what, because I don't want to say specific school site, because then I think that overlaps, but somehow,
Well, I
create a
think
structure.
you could also look at it as our visiting schools is really not a time to be interacting with voters. They're not there. So, the things that Shelley has brought up about office hours and stuff like that, those might be more effective, to create alternate ways to interact with our constituents where we're interacting with the adults rather than walking around a school site.
If I could make one proposal at 6:20, just because we've already made a commitment that we aren't going to make a change till August. And I have done some homework based upon some of the questions you've raised with me personally about how these factors come together and where there are complications and where there are things you can consider. Maybe we come back to it as a more focused workshop topic, because it's not just about liaison schools, it's about representation, it's about engagement, it's about communication. And how about if we give it its due at another time, because this isn't a pressing issue right now, and we can always change this clause whenever we get to that discussion. I'm just thinking that that might be a proposal.
Yeah, and I think it's because it is more complex than just school liaisons, but that was just the opportunity to.
But the way the feeder patterns work and the way the boundaries work,
Yeah.
multiple people are, they might be in 2 halves of the feeder area, right?
Well, and also the school visits, and we're not limited by, we can
No.
only visit, right, our list of assignments. We can actually visit other schools, and there's, now that the districts, I think, kind of let us know a lot of the other events and things like that that's happening at schools. That's another way for us to connect with, right, schools that are not even on our list of assignments.
I had a
Right.
question about the first bullet. I think this year, John, that you maybe changed it so that we don't contact the supervisor, we contact the principal directly,
thought we
copy the
contact-
supervisor.
Contacted both.
Yeah, you still contact both so that they can.
So that needs to be
So I think we
changed.
should change this so it says trustees may schedule school visits by emailing the principal and the supervisor.
And again, just to be clear what that is, we do want you in schools. There's no different message. But what the supervisor would be cognizant of is what is happening at the school. And again, I can say this candidly to you, you and I hold a position of authority, and a principal will never say no to you. Those that you know personally might, but the majority have said, and that's where the supervisor sometimes needs to say, you know what, trustee, absolutely, but that's a crazy week there. And that's something that, again, we want to do to actually facilitate good connections, not in any way inhibit them. But I just want to clarify again why that's there. And it's not because you or I are intimidating. It's just that it's hard to say no, which is why Cindy, when she calls schools on my behalf, always says, before I speak, you can say no to this request if this doesn't work for you, because it seldom will be their answer. So that's part of what we're trying to facilitate when we are adding that piece.
But I think that both makes it much easier to schedule, because when we were trying to go through the supervisor, it was just creating extra work for the supervisor. Anything else on school visits, anyone? Okay, communications? Okay. I think the thinking when this was first brought up, and I think Laura, it might have been your thing, that like when you knew the person, you felt like after the board president had responded, you just wanted to add a note. You know, it's just sort of like what you were referring to of, I hear you.
Yeah, an acknowledgement type of thing.
And then the board president is really being very generic and referring it to staff, but it's just, it's really mostly just letting people know your message was received. And
That's what I was wondering, if it could be more specific, but that's what.
do you have suggested language on how we might say what we just clarified?
Yeah, I could just get something to you.
Yeah,
Okay.
let me take a look at it and, yeah.
I think to capture the language to our F3 colleagues that we can then, you can deal with at the board meeting. If I understand it, because we want to avoid all Brown Act pieces, that individual trustee, because you have a connection to that person, simply saying, even though the board president responded, I just want to acknowledge that I received and read your email, nothing else, copying nobody else, so that there's no sense of any kind of quote unquote meeting going on. I think I'm hearing, Karen, that language doesn't
So
capture that.
clearly it needs more. Yes. We all agree. Yes.
Right. So like I could then CC Shelley in response. Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, good. Okay, and then social media, we already did. Board member reports. I like how we all been pretty good about when others were at the same thing, we say all the names so Cindy gets it all in one. Okay, public comment.
Says on the items not on the agenda where we are not limiting, with that we're limiting discussion on a particular item to 30 minutes. We're not really doing that. So I don't know if we want to change that.
Yeah, that was added kind of in the right aftermath of the pandemic, you know, when we had those 5, 6, 7, 8 forever long hour meetings.
So do we want to just leave it in there, or because it's not
We
something?
probably should say may limit then, because
That's
it
probably a
implies
better
that we
idea.
Will limit it.
And your
Right.
bylaws do say that.
Yeah, the bylaws.
They say
Say the may or
the
the,
30 minutes. And I don't know if it's a shall or may.
is that, I think what we were looking for was the flexibility to do so when, you know, we had essentially 2 hours of public comment ahead of us.
Well, that's right, because you want to be accessible, you want to be available to the public. You must be by law of the people, by the people, for the people. You also have a business meeting you have to conduct, and you have every legal right and responsibility to run your meetings efficiently and manage the work of the district. So sometimes public shows up, and I recall this again, drawing from my own experience, and the meeting can be 3 hours on something that's not even necessarily on your agenda. You do have to be mindful that if you get to that agenda, you have to take care of the work. So if there's a place where you really need to create another spot for that public voice, that might be something for you to consider, but you do 30. The board may, because you have to get your work done.
And that's what the bylaw says.
Yeah.
May, okay, so we'll leave that. parallel. Absolutely. Okay, anything
Yeah.
else there? in public
I want to, under the electronic submission of public comment, I know I've brought this up before and I think that there's value in having an automatic response, maybe that exists, when someone emails public comment, that they get an automatic, your email has been received. Just because I feel like when someone comes in person, they get that acknowledgement that they see them. And when you send an email and you don't get any response, even though I understand that we're not responding in the same way that we're not.
It's just
responding,
message received.
but
right?
message
Didn't go in a black
received.
hole.
Yeah, that because I think that's, it's just courtesy and I think it would be helpful. And it shouldn't be that difficult from a technology standpoint. Yeah.
And Cindy, can we work on getting the directions for resetting up the public comment label out? Because it's not working for me. I know I got to reestablish it somehow. Used to work. Okay, last thing here, new trust, maybe it's not the last thing. The next thing, new trustees.
Yeah, it's just a typo. Under the third bullet, one-on-one meeting with the superintendent.
Trustee areas. Link to the map. Okay, we made it by 6:29. And we have, help. Need to read what your card says. Taiwanese American public speaker, would you like to give your public comment?
Yes, but because we are business and I am a public speaker with right, I believe your meeting ends at 6:30. So does it mean that I only have less than a minute?
No, yeah, 3, right?
Thank you. All right, here we go. It's inappropriate you're changing meeting times from 6 to 7 among yourselves instead of agendizing it in an open session for public discussion before the permanent change. Please avoid meeting on the same Tuesday with San Ramon Teen Councils. The public has the right to attend both meetings, but currently the times conflict with each other. Otherwise, please bar San Ramon Teen Councils from enforcing any action items they approve among themselves as school sites which are governed by the trustees. The public has the right to comment on consent agenda, per the lawyer just said. But if you do not allow us to remove it, then you're forcing us to speak everything we want to remove in 3 minutes. Sometimes the consent agenda can be as many as 114 items. It is inappropriate and extremely rude to encroach into public's right to know and to participate in government when you have things that are agendized as consent agenda. Regarding social media items, why would any official post only to 3 people? Any social media engagement by officials should have digital boundaries. It should not go outside of the district community. Does Trustee Wang Ordway have Weibo or WeChat social media accounts, which are from China? Communist China, I should add. Please just engage true taxpayers with children in the district by replying to their concerns via email instead of ignoring them like you did with the Cal High cheerleading families. Whatever bylaw verbiage you have regarding emails should not be under social media. About minutes recording, it is the agenda item, number, name, and info on the speaker cards. So why are you guys trying to manipulate the card? Furthermore, I am extremely offended by lawyer Karen trying to regulate how I conduct my business with the school district, especially when I have concerns that I know is coming from the school district, and you're trying to regulate how I approach a certain, please, I am not your case number. I am a taxpayer. I have right. Do not regulate my speech, my behavior, and how I conduct my reasoning on how to approach into resolving an issue. Please, you guys really need to stop, offending us like we are stupid people, or is it because we're 2 Asians or 2 immigrants that you feel you have the right to regulate our behavior? Stop.
Okay, any other items